Kevin, as to whether are they doing the video streaming in the council chambers, or what's have you heard from Kevin?
I'm getting text from him.
Yeah,
Yes, we're live.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, perfect. All right, with that, I'll call the special roundtable meeting of the council to order. It's a continuation of a budget process. If there are any members of the public that have dialed in, this is a workshop of the council, so there will not be opportunity for public comment, but we certainly welcome your listening in. So with that, Robert, I'll turn it over to you to go ahead and kick off the presentation.
Okay, just one moment here.
Hey, Catherine, turn your camera around. That's a beautiful phone, but switch your camera to the front camera.
Catherine, there's where your webcam, the little drop-down webcam thing, there's a drop-down menu there. If you go down and pick preferences, you can see select camera where you can go from front to rear and switch that back and forth.
Okay, I see Councilmember Mayhew now as a panelist. I think we're good to go. Mayor, can you ask if he's on? I just want to make sure I see him on here. I want to make sure he's on.
His mic is on. He appears to be on. He hasn't turned his video on yet. Oh, there you go. Catherine, Councilmember Ross is all good to go. Councilor, are you present and ready, or do you want to turn your video on?
Anyone hear me?
There we go. Now we. Councilor Mayo, if you could turn your video on, that would be great.
It won't let me. It says all webcam spaces are being used. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay. It won't let me. It says all the webcam spaces are being used.
Let me get out of mine and see if it frees one up. Hold on a second.
Is that a trade we want to make, Jim, for Rick?
I think you're making a bad trade.
Hey, we can take a vote. We can take a vote.
I don't know who's in charge of the meeting, Robert, but I don't know if there's a way to free up more cams. Like, I don't know if it's limited to 6 or what, but.
Well, it'd be great if we could get a hold of Kevin here. Kevin should be able to open that up.
Let me see. Let me get out of my cam first. I'm not using. Jim, does it allow you now? There you go.
Laptop doesn't have.
All right, that's pretty.
Let me work on. I'll be on voice, but let me work on and see if there's more webcams.
Well, if someone could try and get a hold of Kevin and ask why there's a limit of only 6 video cameras, it doesn't make sense. But okay. All right.
Yeah, it's only. Yeah, I'll call it. There's only 6 of them available right now. So let me call it. While you guys carry on.
All right, Robert, are you ready?
Mr. Mayor, Matt LaFay's here too, but I don't have a webcam, so
yeah. We're working
on
on
all you guys.
So Matt, even if you could turn one on, you don't have one to turn on?
Yeah, I didn't log in with my Surface. I'll do that next time. My home laptop that I use does not have an operable camera.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Is that a Commodore 64 you're running over there at home?
No, it's been dropped before.
I have been too.
Okay, apparently there's only room for 6 webcams at any time on this.
Robert, let's not worry about it. Let's proceed. We'll try and get that worked out, folks. We'll have a few glitches as we perfect this process. But I think the videos would be helpful to make it like more of a real meeting and easier for me to call or when someone wants a hand wave or something for getting attention. So, Robert, go ahead.
I just want to make sure everybody can see my screen, which is the slideshow. Should be able to see Council Budget Roundtable number 4.
Yep.
Okay, so tonight we're going to have a fund balance discussion. Then we're going to go into the introduction to expenditures, and then I have a slide at the end for COVID-19 Q&A, just some brief updates on information. And I'll go very slowly through these slides to take questions, and I'll just try to, not everybody has a webcam, but if you want to just try to chime in, I'll just go slow, and if everybody wants to chime in every so often, I can pause for questions. So I'll just take this very slowly. And so the city,
Hang on a second, Rob.
fund
If someone's doing some typing on email or something, if you could put yourself on mute while you're doing that, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Robert.
So we're starting out here with the introduction of the fund balance types, and just a refresher, city has the type of fund balance we have: restricted, that's state or federal law restricts revenues for certain activities, such as grant or for transportation, things like that. So items where we have to fund certain programs with those funds. Then there's also council committed or assigned. And what that means is if per council policy or appropriation, if you commit funds for certain uses, if you can remember back to the CIP in 2019, council committed certain funds for transportation, capital projects, for example, for parks projects, for facilities projects. That would be what you commit or assign funds for. And then uncommitted or unassigned would be an unappropriated general government fund balance. It's not appropriated, not committed, not restricted. And then enterprise utilities, that's an entirely separate category. Funds are restricted to the purpose of the enterprise. You can see here with the fund balance chart, and I'm going to go through this very slowly. If Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew wants to chime in, feel free to at any time as well. You can start out here on the top left corner. You can see the category, and then back to what is restricted, what we just talked about on the previous slide. That'll be the next category. Then you see council committed, and again, this could be actions the council took 20 years ago to establish a fund, or 10 years ago when they passed comprehensive financial policies. So that's anything that's been council committed, not just this council, but in the past. Then the next category you see on the top there going to the right is unrestricted or uncommitted fund balance. And then you see enterprise funds right there, which again are just the utilities. And then we just have the total at the end. So this is our estimated ending fund balance for 2020. And so
Robert, I don't know if anyone else can see the very bottom totals are cut off on mine. I don't know if you can pull the slide deck up a little further. Or...
I'm not sure. Let me take a look.
Maybe lower it like 90% instead of 100%.
If you if you enlarge it and will it be able, if you enlarge the screen, can you scroll so we can see the bottom?
How about that? Does that work at all?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay.
It's up now.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Yeah, so everyone, I think what they're trying to do for us is, as you think back to the work plan, the idea was at this stage, we would review first all of the revenues that we have, which is what they took us through in the last meeting. And then this would be kind of the other piece of the broad category of sources, right? So we have the revenues that'll come in, plus we have what's already in the bank. And this is what they're projecting will be in the bank at the end of the year. So this, together with that, will represent the resources we have to work with going forward. The next thing they'll start to talk to us about is the expenditure needs. But what they're trying to do is pause for us at each stage, because later when we start to getting into putting all this together and we get back to what we all talked about in the retreat, which is that the needs, the list of needs is greater, or the list of things we want and need is greater than the list of sources that we have. So that's when we're going to start getting into tougher conversations about what our priorities are and what choices we'll make. So what they're trying to let us do here is get familiar with these numbers and ask questions about them, and ensure that we feel reasonably comfortable, so that when we get into the later conversations, and look, they expect we're going to double back later on. Wait. Tell me more about that revenue again. I didn't really, I wasn't as focused then as I am now, or wait. Same about the fund balances. But their idea is right now, any questions that we have, they'd love to answer now, so we sort of get our minds wrapped around these rough ideas. Even if we change our minds later, let's at least kind of see, do we understand what's here and why things are where they are, and are we kind of ready to move on, at least at this point, that we understand the sources. So that's what they're hoping or they're trying to give us time to have that kind of a conversation now.
Councilor Ross.
Mr. Hammoud said council committed means that it could have happened anytime within the last 20 years. So
Or
do we,
anytime, 100 years ago, anytime.
right.
Just an action
And
of
so
council.
are there, I mean, are these outdated? Are there some things you suggest that we change, that we take a look at?
That's up to the council. That's up to the council's purview. One thing that has been discussed, I know lately, if you look at one of the top categories there where it says economic stabilization and sustainability reserve, I know that's one thing that has been discussed a little bit at the retreat. That number right now, that's a council policy that was passed about 12 years ago, set that at 10%. But that's something where I know Councilmember Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew brought this up at a previous meeting where, and if you remember, we were looking at the recession scenarios and we were talking about a quote unquote typical recession's impact on the city's finances would be approximately $2.3 million. So that might be something where council decides to set another level, maybe 2.3 million or less. That's up to the council to look at something like that to decide if that 10% level is sufficient. Again, council can make different decisions. Council can also uncommit certain revenues. Like for example, good example of this is you set up a fund for human services. That's a fund that is council committed entirely. That's funded through the budget appropriations each year. That's by council policy. You can, uncommit that. You could close that fund. You could redirect the money, or you could increase that commitment. So that's another example of what council's actions could do. So again, council has a lot of leeway as far as what they want to recommend, what they want to change in terms of the policy. That's up to the council. I hope that makes sense.
Councilor Sunwell, I don't know if you were trying to put your hand up or poke me in the eye earlier or just adjust your camera. Did you have a question or?
Both actually. So this is what we project to be at the end of 2020 after we've spent all the money in a budget we haven't seen yet. I guess what I'm saying is this count for 2020 spending?
Correct.
Off of a budget we haven't, well, no, I guess we have approved 2020, haven't we? So, yeah. Okay. Got it.
Councilor Mayhew. Your audio's.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I forgot what I was going to say. I think Mr. Holloway had his hand up.
Councilor Holloway.
Nitpick.
Ask Jim's questions.
Tourism promotion, you have $75,000 in there, and it goes across. It doesn't show up in the subtotal in the line below. That just okay. No, it's a nit. A nit.
Good catch. Thank you.
I like the way you have it structured to do the cross check.
It's only the nit because the amount. That's, I mean, obviously those need to add up.
Yeah.
Councilor Mayhew.
Yeah, so I think I remembered. So, so what happens is I kind of got caught up in what Councilmember Sunwall was saying, but so if we think about it, so there's the budget that we're going through, as he was kind of focusing on, which has revenues that we've projected and expenditures that we have appropriated. So what Mr. Hammoud has done, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but what he's done is he's actually projected out, he's projecting, so these are estimates, but he's projected out how much revenue will actually come in and how much of those expenditures will actually get spent. And this is where he thinks it's going to end. So as we sort of think about the next biennium, we'll have whatever revenues I'll say we project, but you know, we'll look for projections to come to us, but then we'll have to decide, you know, there's ranges. So we'll have to decide which projections we all decide we're going to assume. Then plus we've got these resources that you see here. And then we'll have to look at what expenditures, how do we want to spend these? So when you look, for example, at the general governmental capital, that second group, what's our non-utility CIP going to look like? What spending will we have during that biennium? And then looking out over the 6-year projection or longer. So these are the groupings that we'll have. That, I guess, if that makes sense. So it's this is after we get through the end of 20. This will be what we'll be left with, and then they've been showing us the charts looking forward for the future years on what revenues, and then soon they'll tell us about the expenditures.
Question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Councilmember Sunwell.
So, if I recall, for 2020, we passed a balanced budget. I'm just going to use super round numbers. So we projected 18 million coming in, 18 million going out. So these numbers should be the same whether we're looking, the rough balances should look the same whether we're looking at 2020 or 2021, 2019 or 2021, right? If we're truly spending to the dollar the same that we projected we're coming in. Because we haven't proposed dipping into, our budget doesn't call for dipping into these fund balances, does it?
No, not for the general governmental funds. Now, as far as the capital, that might be subject to change based on some changing circumstances right now, but right now we are anticipating on the governmental funds, meaning the general fund plus community development. At this point, yes, we're anticipating a balanced budget still by the end of 2020. So that's correct. It's not moving much.
Councilor Mayhew.
Yeah, so I'd say the 18 million, which is our governmental operating budget, the ins and outs equate with that first group called general governmental. Our capital budget, so the 18 million or so was our operating budget per year. The capital budget, which varies year to year depending on the capital projects, you have to go back and look at our CIP, what we were authorizing for each year. That equates to that second group. This is the non-utility CIP equates to that second group. The enterprise, of course, refers to the utilities, which is about 10 million a year, give or take, including operating and capital. And then the internal services funds, those revolving funds we spent a lot of time on, I think, in the last biennial budget process where we looked at the ER&R fund. Remember, we spent a bunch of time on that and why that 3.3 million was either too low or too high or just right. And same with the IT fund and so on. So those are just those internal service funds that get replenished by charge outs to the operating fund and to all the funds. So that's that bottom group. So the 18 million really equates to that top group, Councilmember Sundwall, if that makes sense. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is, if you think about those two reserves, well, it's actually three reserves, but you think about the reserves up in the general governmental, the contingency reserve is, so almost every city in Washington has it. In fact, there's a state law that caps out how much can go in that particular reserve, but we use that reserves for emergencies. So for example, we authorized that money to be used for Snowmageddon. And we'd expect that in the current emergency, the mayor might look to spend some of that as well on direct emergency expenses. So the thing we have to think about is when that happens, then as we look forward, we have to think, well, now how are we going to replenish those funds? And then the other thing I think, have to be really thoughtful about is, do we think those economic stabilization and sustainability reserves are adequate? So when a recession comes, like many are thinking we've stepped into now, but think about, well, how long do we want to be able to maintain current service levels? And how long might we think a recession will go, and how much of an impact will it have on us? And then when we think about things like, will we want to spend money that we normally wouldn't spend? Do we want to do some things for staff that we wouldn't do in normal times that we might want to have money to be able to do for them? So are the things we might want to do for citizens, for residents, for businesses? All of those kind of go into the equation of how much ought we have in those funds. And I think we should spend some time asking ourselves whether there's enough there, because I, for one, think we don't have enough there. So maybe some of that money in the unrestricted or uncommitted in general governmental, I think some of that we should send some of that into those reserves and boost those reserves. But here's the key point. Administration cannot move any of these monies between these fund categories. Only the council can move money between fund categories. So keep that in mind. We control how these numbers end up being where they are. That's fine.
Councilor Summo.
When you say categories, Jim, is categories the bolded or the not bolded?
Oh, sorry. All the rows down the left side. That's what I meant.
So he can't move contingency to economic stabilization without council approval.
That's correct.
Gotcha.
And that's not just council policy, that's state law. So,
okay, so within the subcategories, those subcategories can't be tinkered with without council approval.
That's right. And just so you know, this is one of the things that Mr. Hammoud's been talking to us about over the last year. The actual funds, there are actually more than those. They did a few roll-ups for us. So for example, when you look at parks down there in the general governmental capital, it says parks. That's actually in several funds that each of them are specific within parks, but they're all parks. So one of the things they're trying to do is get rid of some of the large number of individual lines so that our funds look more like this. But actually the restriction is actually on that lower level. They just cannot move fund balances between funds without our approval. And by the way, if they have, the state auditor would tell us.
Okay, any other questions on this? Councilor Holloway.
In government general capital, you have 140,000 debt service. Which debt is that?
That is that's the fire station.
That's the fire station. Okay. And 4,555,000 in facilities. That is council committed. What is that?
That is the appropriated. So if you remember the CIP budget ordinance that established a facilities capital fund, that was the appropriated transfer. That was the one-time revenues that we put into a newly established facilities capital fund.
Okay. All right. Non-utility CIP. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
So for example, Councilor Holloway, as you know, my original proposal with the community center was to pay $4 million cash with $6 million bonded through a councilmanic bond. That's where that $4 million rests. But you can see just above that in transportation, it's about $3 million. And we were originally anticipating that the parkway would be funded perhaps out of in excess of 70% of grants. And that's becoming, given the state now in a further crisis, having lost the TBD revenues for the state as well as whatever other hit they're going to take with the COVID-19 virus. I'm just feeling like we're running out of time, as I stated at the council retreat, and the parkway is literally just starting to fall apart. We're running out of time to pursue grants, so that number on transportation may need to go up a bit in order for us to get on top of that quickly.
All right.
Councilor
Are
Rose.
you-
Councilor Rose.
Okay, so so the general capital spending, is that also the non-utility CIP? The
Yes,
2.4 million?
That's actually, that general capital spending, I believe Reed is in there. So that's part of that is the balance we have in our Reed fund as well. But yes, it is council committed for capital. So that includes council committed capital spending, correct?
So it includes that plus the facilities down below are both non-utility CIP.
Right. Everything you see that's not on that far right enterprise column is non-utility CIP. So transportation, parks, everything in that category.
Okay, thank you.
So Robert, similar to the equipment or ER&R fund, the council several years ago said, hey, let's commit sort of a minimum number to parks maintenance every year, upgrading playground equipment and other things in parks to make sure we're not slipping on that. And I see down below in internal services, it was roughly a number around $300,000 that was set aside for that. But I'm also seeing under general government capital facilities is the 4.5, as Councilmember Holloway is pointing out. Can you speak to the distinction between those two, why one falls into one category and one in the other, and yet they're both facilities?
Right. So, I'm sorry, parks or facilities? I lost the question.
Well, where's the parks? Where's that ongoing parks? I assume that's the 315 or.
Right. So that was, so if you remember with the budget appropriation for the past CIP in 2019, actually had established a consolidated parks capital fund. So again, that's for parks maintenance, that's for parks construction, that's for parks enhancements. That's separate from facilities. Facilities was intended to be larger scale projects. So I know we talked about the community center. At one point, there was discussion about the city hall annex, buildings like that, any kind of renovation on our current buildings, major projects, that would be the facilities fund.
All right, thank you. Councilor Mayhew.
Yeah, so I think if I understand the mayor's question right, I think this is just a perfect question to make sure we understand this chart. So this is just what's in the bank at the end of the year. So during the year, every year, we take about 300 to 350. I can't remember the number, 300 to 350,000, whatever the mayor was just referring to. And that much goes into that parks category, and then we spend it. So that much then also goes out. So roughly at the end of the year, we have roughly what was there at the beginning of the year. And so so on this chart, you don't see the 300 or 350, whatever it is a year that we put in, because this is saying at the end of the year, and so it will have gone in and then been spent and gone back out. What's here is, so you might say, well, then what the heck is that 878,000? Well, we've been putting money aside. So for example, and when I say we, I mean people before us on the council, we, the council, over time have put money aside. So for example, one of the things that's in that 878,000 is something called the Jeannie Hansen replacement, turf replacement. I can't remember the exact name of the fund, but money's been being put away each year towards that eventual cost. And there are a number of specific things like that the council's been doing. And when you add up those numbers, you come up with 878. So there's a specific list of what those associate with of specific projects. But the annual spending sort of flows in and out. You don't really see it on this chart because it's gone by the time you get to the end of the year, if that makes sense. And then the one other thing I wanted to say is on REIT, which is that row, general capital spending. In earlier years, my understanding, this is long before I was on the council, but my understanding is the council was reluctant to spend REAP money until it was already in the door. And so they developed a pattern where they always spent the REAP money the year after it was collected. The result of that is you always have a REAP fund balance. And then what happens is they come to us each year and they propose how to spend the REAP. Now we're on biennial, so they propose how to spend the REAP over the next biennium. But we've never really moved off of this idea of spending it kind of after we already have it, which now it would be reasonable. And when you look at the budget or the projections that Mr. Hammoud's given us, both at last budget cycle as well as during the course of this year, the retreat and so on, he's showing us what he projects REAP to be each year. So I think one of the things we can consider is that 2.447, 2.5 million there could be, we could go ahead and assign that out to other categories, like the mayor alluded to the need potentially to put more money towards the parkway resurfacing and so forth. So I think we're going to need to look at that collective. If you look at that group, it's a collective 11 million, and then compare that against the various things in our CIP, non-utility CIP, and potentially allocate some of that 2.5 million to make sure we've covered all the things in our projects. Because just so you know, I don't know if you guys have, I think I might have mentioned this at the retreat, but when you look at what's in our utility CIP and the funds that we have way more projects that we said we were going to do in the next 2 years than we have funding for, by an order of multiple times more. So we're going to have to revisit that non-utility CIP. But anyway, we can look at, these are some of the resources we can use.
I just want to emphasize that Councilor May was talking about the non-utility CIP. I think at one point you might have said utility.
Oh, I apologize. Spoke too fast. I meant non-utility CIP.
Any other questions on this before Robert moves on?
Just to be clear, Mayor, the utilities CIP, if you guys look down the enterprise column, you'll see there's a number, a row that says capital, 1.7 million. That relates to utilities CIP. And then you might say, well, what's this 7.5 million in operations? Why have we accumulated 7.5 million from operations of the utilities? Are we charging too much for utilities? And the answer is when I was on the council then, when the last time the council looked at their rate study and what rates to charge and what capital projects to commit to, they decided that some of the capital spending should be paid for by current ratepayers and some should be paid by borrowing and therefore paid by future ratepayers. So that policy decision that they made resulted in the rates that have been charged. As they've been spending down the capital against that plan, the utilities capital, they first used the borrowed amounts, that's that row called capital, and then they'll use the amounts that came out of operations. But the intention, the reason that those balances have built up there, which is, over 9 million, is that's just all committed to the existing utilities capital plan that's in place and that we'll have to revisit this year as well. But so that's where utilities CIP is. And I definitely meant to say non-utility CIP when I was referring to the REIT and that group of 11 million under the council committed column up under general governmental capital.
I have a question.
Yeah, Councilmember Shepherd.
Hi, did we get this slide deck sent to us by email yet?
I could send it to you by email.
Thanks.
Councilman Laseda, do you have any questions or comments? You may have to unmute prior to.
I'm trying.
Oh, okay. We can hear you now.
Yeah, no questions. I'm following along. I don't have, everybody's asked the questions I was thinking about, and Councilor Mayhew did a good job of explaining a number of things. So I'm good.
All right, thank you. I don't see that Councilmember Jeans has an opportunity to join us, so unless he's on by phone or something, giving him an opportunity to ask a question. Bob, are you by chance there? All right, Robert, go ahead and continue.
Okay, hold on just one moment. Just want to send Councilmember Shipley the slide.
I'm sorry, you're doing what?
Hold on a second.
Robert, are you sending it all to all of us?
Yes, give me one moment here. It's going to pause my screen for just a minute. Thank you.
You're saying this way folks can pull it up and follow along. If
Correct.
you want to blow it up a little bit here.
We have the ability to edit the numbers.
Mayor, I just want to tell you that this meeting has way better snacks than our normal meetings have. Just I highly approve of them. I guess I'm assuming you all have the same snacks I have.
I was gonna say my snacks aren't that good.
And so one note I just wanted to make on this slide before we move on is if you go down to the internal service funds, just wanted to make an editorial on the equipment repair and replacement. So again, if you remember past conversations with council, there's a goal, of course, to have enough funding sufficient for replacements as they continue to roll on. So therefore, that's why that fund balance has been built up over time to make sure that when we have large purchases coming up that we're sufficiently funded year after year on the equipment and repair and replacement. And again, that's internal service charges to other funds within the city. And information technology pretty much operated that same way. They created a fund balance. They built up a fund balance for certain capital projects to fund them, including, like, for example, the enterprise system replacement that we recently brought to council for the RFP, items like that. That's why they built that fund balance. Facility maintenance, there's a fund balance right now because the steps haven't been done yet. And at the city hall, that was a project that was approved a few years ago that still hasn't been done. So there's still a fund balance there. So again, all those fund balances you see with internal services go back towards servicing those programs. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Councilmember Sundwall.
On the ER&R, do we feel like that is about where it should be, that it's underfunded or that it's overfunded? And if, based on that question, I guess we would potentially need to make some adjustment. It feels high, but the group I chair buys a lot of the vehicles, not all of them, but I'm just curious what Robert's or Jim's feedback might be on that.
It's a longer discussion. It is something we're going to bring back to council. It's something that I know that we're still working with the department on, updating the ER&R as we go along. It's something we're revisiting right now. I know that there's one piece of equipment that's not included in here, which is the ladder truck that we've resubmitted a grant for, and we're hoping that we're successful, but that could be a while to hear back. So that is something we're still revisiting as far as.
I'm fine with that answer, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Councilmember Mayhew. Your audio, please.
I thought it was working perfectly.
Oh, there we go. Yes, it was. I was just going to say, Mr. Hammoud made the main point I wanted to make, which is that 2 years ago, when we were going through the budget cycle, we asked the same question that Councilmember Sundwall just asked, and we spent quite a bit of time at council, which I think was appropriate. And I agree with Mr. Hammoud's answer, which is I would anticipate we'll similarly spend a lot of time looking at that. That's a big number, and it gets funded by charge outs to all the departments. So that's a big number that those departmental budgets have to bear. And so you it's really important that we're getting that right. And if you all remember, there was a whole list of the equipment and it's scheduled out as to what year they think they'll have to replace it. And there's a lot of calculation behind that. And they went through all that with us, and I would expect they'll do that again. So I was pleased to hear Mr. Hamoud his answer just now that, yeah, they'll come back to us with that in detail. But I wanted to make the one key point, which is it is just for replacement of equipment we currently have. There is nothing in that line that lets us buy new equipment. So if we decided that we needed a ladder truck, which many of us believe is not in our too distant future, the funding for that's going to have to come from somewhere else. It's not in that replacement fund, replacement and repair fund. So we're going to have to find the money to buy that, and then, you know, the ongoing replacement of it will fall into how that fund charges out. But so there's that, or any other equipment additions that we might decide we think we need to do. All that has to come from somewhere else.
Okay, go ahead, Robert.
Okay. These next few slides, I won't spend too much time on them, but I'll pause and see if anybody has any question. These are the definitions. I know Mayor Pro Tem Mayhew's already gone over some of these, but if there's any questions on them, this just kind of breaks down the chart, a description of each of the categories. So I'll just give a couple minutes here so everybody can look at the slide. If they have any questions, just chime in.
Can I make a comment on the equipment repair and replacement definition?
Go ahead, Councilmember Shepherd.
Councilmember Mayhew mentioned that this does not replace or help us buy new equipment, is simply to repair. And I think that might be good to actually put it into the definition, even though that is the title. I think that it would be worth spelling out the definition.
Councilmember Holloway.
So that's not entirely true statement. The ENR fund is to replace worn out equipment as well as to maintain the existing equipment. It is just not there to buy a replacement for something you don't have. So it's a ladder truck would be a new item.
Yeah, that is not in the current inventory. But as you know, when we buy new police cars, in fact, the vast majority of the fund is spent on replacing vehicles.
Oh, yeah, okay, I guess, but what I would like to say is if there's a need that we don't currently have that existing vehicle and we want to purchase we want to add to our our vehicles, then we need to say something like that in here.
This is not used for new vehicles, just to make sure. That would be a budget enhancement. That would be new spending. This is just for fund balance directed towards the long-term replacement plan. So you could replace existing vehicles. It could be a different model, but it's replacing an existing function. This is not new spending. This is replacing existing functions, existing fleet.
This is just to ask to have the definitions explain that. That's all I'm asking. What you guys are saying, I would just like to have that added. If we're keeping this somewhere, I like this list of definitions. I just think it would be nice to have that added. Does that make sense?
Councilmember Mayhew and Councilmember Sunwell.
Yeah, two things. I think that what Councilmember Shepherd is suggesting is if you look at what's on the screen there for equipment repair and replacement, directed towards long-term replacement plan of, I think she's looking for something like existing city equipment and vehicles or existing inventory of. She's just looking for some, what you're saying, if you could try and find a way to put that into the wording there. I think that's all she's asking.
Okay.
Or just add the word existing city equipment and vehicles might accomplish that. Yeah.
That might check with her what she thinks, but I think she's just asking for your clarifying comment. If there's a way to get that in there, that would be really helpful. And then the other comment I just want to make is keep in mind that on internal funds, like take that IT fund, and Mr. Hammoud, correct me if I'm wrong, but where we provide services, IT services out of that fund to other cities, which we do, those cities pay into those funds the same way that our city departments do. They pay in as well. So they're paying their fair share because they're using those resources. Correct, Mr. Hammoud?
They're paying for operational resources. That's a tricky fund, and that's something that we're examining in-house just because we have enterprise capital projects within the fund that also includes operating. The enterprise projects for the city of Duval are not included. They're in their own funding. So what they're paying us for is just the operational contract that we have with that maintenance contract.
And then what about, for
it's
example,
a little confusing, I know.
All right. So, and then is another, am I correct that another example would be, for example, the police vehicles for North Bend, their repair and replacement, are they part of our ENR fund?
No, they are not. And we're actually coming back to council to establish, per the contract, a North Bend specific ER&R fund for police vehicles.
Okay. So they'll have their own separate ER&R fund that they pay into and then that they draw out of in the same way that ours works for our city departments.
That's correct.
Okay. Got it.
Councilmember Sunwell. Okay. Councilmember Shepherd, were you satisfied with the addition of the word existing there? That
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Robert.
And that's all the slides we had on fund balances. Was there any further discussion on fund balances before I move to expenditures?
Okay, hearing none.
Okay. So tonight we're going to go into operating expenditure discussion. So again, we'll have capital at a future date. Right now, we're going to talk about operating expenditures. And so this is the total governmental operating expenditures in millions between 2014 and 2019. So you can see, and again, governmental type, if you remember, includes all administration functions of the city, police, fire, CD, parks, and streets operations. And so you can see the increase over time from approximately 13.5 million in 2014 to 18.2 in 2019. So you can see the growth over time commensurate with the growth in the community. And also coming out of the aftermath of the last recession. You can see the growth from that.
Councilmember Mayhew.
And Mr. Hammoud, could you just comment, during that time period, were the, the level of service that was provided, was that increasing during that time or roughly flat, or can you make any comment on what was going on with love. I mean, I know the city was still expanding a bit. Were we expanding levels of service or just keeping up with a growing population, or were we getting some kind of economies of scale, or kind of what was happening on levels of service?
There was an increase in FTE budgeted and approved during that time, but there were some vacancies that actually impacted the spending on this chart. But there was an increase in, I don't know, some police and also some administration type positions during that time. As far as the level of service, this was trying to keep up with the needs of the city. So again, there was no major new programs during this time. This is kind of keeping up with the status quo. There wasn't any major, new facility that opened. There wasn't a major new park. This was keeping up with what we had. I hope that makes sense.
Well, and just simple underlying inflationary pressures across the board in the tune of what, 3%, Robert, or so?
Right. There's that, but there's also, and just to make the side note that CD is included in this chart. And so there were some CD expenditures that increased some of these numbers because when they have plans that come to us, we end up making revenue off it. But there's engineering costs, there's plan checking costs, there's inspection fees that the city, hires consultants. So some of that is reflected in this chart. In the 2019 number, that also ticked up a bit because of outside legal services and the cost for that.
Well, in using CD department or the community development department as an example, I mean, the goal was always to try to get to where that department was largely paying its own way through the development fees and mitigation fees that would come in. But because there's a lot of state mandated activities of that department, like comp plan updates, shoreline hearings plan updates, that really are part of the natural responsibilities of a city, regardless of what sort of development or growth is going on. Those costs are hard to capture in those fees. So we've always fallen a bit short, and there's been higher costs there built into budgets.
Can you just remind me, there was a levy lid lift for some police and fire, I think primarily staff. Was that because the rate of increase sort of changed between 17 and 18? Is that when those additional positions were coming online?
Correct.
Yeah, the levy lid lift was in November 2016.
Okay, but as I recall, there was some delay trying to get those people hired, find them, and so am I right in believing that 18 is kind of when those expenditures were fully kicking in, and that's perhaps why that ticked up, as well as the CD thing that you just mentioned?
That's correct. There were some vacancies in that department in 16 and 17. That's why it lagged a little bit past the levy passage.
Yeah, and the other levy lift prior to that, which had a parks component to it too, was in 2012. All right.
Any further questions on this chart from anybody? Okay, I'll move on. So again, this is just governmental operating expenditures.
Robert, actually, I was trying to remember. I know I had a comment or whatever. When we were doing the work plan at the roundtable, our first roundtable on this entire subject matter, the council might recall I gave an example of a metric. It showed a bar similar to this, except rather than these being costs, each color represented a department and represents the overall growth in each department. And then there was a dashed line going across that. So although there was some relative cumulative total growth in all departments of FTEs over several years, when you compared that to the population growth and demand on services, the FTEs per 1,000 residents was actually kind of coming down. So we weren't quite, there was an economies of scale we're capturing there, but we weren't probably in some areas quite keeping up with that growth and the demands. But we'll bring back more updated data on that brings us up to the current time, or 2000 through 2019, when we get into that portion of our discussion on levels of service. Sorry, Robert, go ahead.
No, that's fine. And you can see here, again, public safety is the bulk of the expenditures each year on operating. Is approximately 6.3 million in 2014, goes up to about 7.9 million in 2019. That's police, fire, and emergency management. And you can see the administration plus non-departmental category That's essentially doubled, but part of that 2019 was there was increased outside legal counsel services in 2019 due to litigation. And then Public Works operating streets and parks, you can see that's gone from about 2.5 million to about approximately 3.5 million during that time. And community development, it's held essentially steady based on projects. We're expecting that to decrease in 20, and we were before any of the emergency happened, just because the high school finished in 18 and 19. A lot of the major projects within the city, including phase 2 on the Ridge, ended. The Hampton Inn ended, and so the activity for that department decreases. So that decreases both on the revenue side and also the expenditure side.
And Robert, just to make very clear in this chart on the green, Public Works operating streets and parks. Public Works is enterprise funds, but streets and parks are general fund, and so you have some of the Public Works staff that work on street and parks issues or Parks Department. I just want to make sure the distinction was that there's no enterprise funds represented in that green, correct?
No, just Public Works operating streets and parks. That side of Public Works, not the utility side.
And then also wanted to point to on the dark blue, to Councilor Mayhew's point on the earlier slide, you can see in 2016 and 17, then a jump of some 0.6 million in both police and fire, where we added two detectives and 1 firefighter. So 3 FTE positions in public safety at that point, where they really fully came online in 2018. So that bump there. And then of course there was all the attention on addressing deficiencies in administration staff, particularly with this council, on tightening controls and addressing the back house that we probably hadn't taken a hard look at in many years, with given the growth pains that we were going through. And so you can see a fairly significant jump in that time frame as well, between 17 and 18, due to those increases or staff, the addition of staff there. Councilor Mayhew.
Yeah, Mayor, I think you said 6 million when you were talking about public safety.
0.6. 0.6.
0.6, yeah.
Yeah, 600,000. Yeah.
Matt, can I make a comment?
Oh, Councilor Jeans, welcome.
Robert, I'm wondering why you have put public safety together that way, rather than showing particularly police and fire.
I just wanted to show it as a visual, just to consolidate it for the purposes of this chart being too visual. I mean, too busy. I just wanted to show how much public safety was versus Public Works versus administration. I can give you a breakout if you like. I can send you a chart that breaks out the two if you'd like.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to break those out. I do know that the fire department will not agree with the color you used for that.
I know. I was debating that. Lesser of two evils.
I guess I would say that this is divided by department. Like, this is how we're organized. So this slide needs to exist. If you want to have another slide that breaks up each department by its own thing, fine. But this is how we're organized. So add another slide, but don't get rid of this one.
No, they're not. He's not suggesting that, Councilor Summerall. All that Councilor Jeans is asking for is that the blue be broken into blue and red, police, fire.
But that's not how we're organized.
Well, under general fund, that there is 2 distinct departments there, so I'm not sure. There isn't a Department of Public Safety.
Well, I'm going to break this. I'm going to keep this chart, break it out, and I'm going to break out parks and streets, fire, and police. I'm going to break those out, so you'll see the difference.
Yeah, it shouldn't complicate it too much.
Just to mess with them, make red for police and blue for fire.
I thought about it already.
We're trying to make fire happy by putting some red in there.
That would be an appropriate color. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I could have actually done the sidewalls red and then the front blue, but too late now.
All right. Any other questions on this one? There we go.
So the next one, I took the same information, but instead of showing it by functional area of service, I'm showing it by category. So you see personnel services, that's all your salaries and benefits. Then you have internal service charges. So again, those charges that I showed before for funds like ER&R, facilities, risk management, those internal IT, and then services, supplies, and contracts. So you can see that again, the bulk of the spending in the city each year is with those personnel services, those salaries and benefits. That's your large amount of spending citywide. So again, for the operating expenditure, for the governmental operating expenditures, you started 2014 with approximately 8.2 million personnel services. Again, with some of the staff enhancements the mayor spoke about, and just some of the growth as far as inflation for benefits and salary, longevity pay, union contracts, COLAs, you're up from 8.2 million up to about 10.7 million in 2019. And you can see that internal service charges, they've gone up a bit because we've increased some of the, when we talked about the ER&R fund, they had a increase this year. That's, again, we're reevaluating actually as we go along, we're reevaluating all of the internal service charge outs. So that number could change in the next budget. And then you can see that services, supplies, contracts, that's about, starts at about 3.1 million, about 4.8 million in 2019.
Councilor Mayhew?
So I think this slide is really important for all of us to understand. This, I think, slide lays out the sort of hard conversations for us to have. I kind of wish that this slide went a little differently. I wish the orange color was on top, because the blue color and the green color together, I think, behave in the same way as the blue. So the blue is our staff, and as Mr. Hammoud was just explaining, you know, this is the salaries and benefits and so on. But the green is, those are services that we contract, and they behave largely the same way. So they go up for COLAs and increased benefit costs and so forth. So when you look at this and you realize, and then the internal service funds, there's not much we can do about that unless we're going to make big different decisions about equipment replacement and repairs. So as you look at this, it's really hard to find a lot of wiggle room to look at expenses. I'm not saying we shouldn't. We absolutely should and must, and I'm sure we will. But when it's so heavily tied to the number of staff, this just displays to me very graphically between the green and the blue how much is in the salary category, and therefore how hard that is to work with.
The green is a combination of contracts and supplies, so it's not all tied to employment, if you will.
Yeah, I wonder if in future slides you guys might be able to break that green out. I don't know if you've got the internal reporting that lets you do this, but it sure would be nice to know how much of that green is services versus things like supplies or things that are non-people related.
Yeah, that's easy to do. So just like the other chart, I could just add another chart that shows that.
Okay, further.
Sorry, I was muted. Councilmember Ross.
Okay. Mr. Hammoud, can you tell us again, what are some of the services and what are some of the contracts again that's in the green?
Okay, so it's pretty much anything that's operating contracts. So think the prosecutor's contract, jail contract, think the landscape contract, things like that that are in governmental operating, that are those contracts that we have year to year in the city. So there are insurance, things like that. But again, that's easy to break out, so I could update the slide and send that out to everybody.
All right, if there's no further questions, go ahead and continue, Robert.
Thank you. So again, these are the approved enhancements from 2014 again to 2020, just because we have that data. Because these are the approved enhancements from each of the biennial budgets going back that far. So you can see year to year, based on what the mayor said, you can see those staff increases in 2017 and 18 that were part of those increases there. And so you can see 19 and 20, it just ended about approximately about 900,000 each year of approved enhancements. So again, these are budgeted enhancements, budgeted FTEs. Doesn't mean all of this money was technically spent. This is just what was approved by council. For example, there was an enhancement for the back stairs at City Hall that was approved as an enhancement in 2017, and that project has not been completed yet. So this is, again, just approved project, approved spending.
It was a $400,000 project.
Yes, and it includes one-time and ongoing projects. So any enhancement, both one-time and ongoing each year that was passed by council.
All right, go ahead, Robert.
So again, key changes from 2014 to 2019. The largest increase by function was administration and the non-departmental, nearly double over the 6-year period. That included the increase in staffing needs and also programming. Think about growth, like for example, with the human services funding, some of the other programs as well. And also some of that was also support to other departments as well, coming from that non-departmental. So again, maintaining this level of service of the city, that contributed to that growth in that category. Public safety increase, that's approximately 5.2% annually during that period. Personnel services, they increased on average of 6.1% annually. So that included both inflation costs and those new positions we talked about. The city always runs, runs a certain amount of vacancies. Right now, for example, we're at a unique position because we're running, believe over 4% vacancies right now. That's pretty high for us. And services and supplies and contracts, they increased an average of about 11% annually. Some of that is also driven by community development expenses. And in 2019, we had a large amount of outside legal costs. But again, I'll give a breakout on those services and supplies and contracts. I'll send out a chart that breaks them out from 14 to 19.
Councilmember Mayhew. Mute.
Just to that point, Mr. Hammoud, if you could help us know the difference between, if you're able to, between costs that are moving around. For example, you gave the community development example. So there, when a project comes in, we are obligated to hire outside engineers and other outside services to help us process that. We get reimbursed for it by the developer, but our costs go up. So if you were able to break those kind of costs out from the ones that actually represent the ongoing costs that we're funding out of the ongoing revenues, that might help us understand a little better the amount of increase that's happening, that's sort of built in as opposed to just responsive to external factors that we don't control.
Okay.
So if you're able to do that, I think that'd be helpful going forward.
Okay. But the other question is, how much do I break out? Because you have, like, for example, litigation. We always have outside legal costs. We just had, one specific issue that drove it up in 19. I guess, because it's more of a one-time, I could take that out too.
Yeah, I think we'll trust your judgment. Just maybe help us understand this a little better.
Okay.
Yeah, I could be using that same chart, just doing some more narrative behind what's driving the spikiness.
Yes. And so moving on, this is the forecast. Believe I've showed before. We've made a little bit of tweaks to this, but you can see from 2019 to 2026. There are some spikiness in from 19 to 20 and 21. Again, some decrease in expenditures year to year, offset by some inflation. So it makes it essentially flat during that time. And then we're growing by inflationary increases going forward from 2021 essentially to 2026 through that forecast period.
So Robert, is inflation the primary cost driver here, or do you have any increase in FTEs built into this?
We have no increases whatsoever in FTEs built into this. Now we're assuming, benefit costs of 6 to 7% a year, FTE, longevity increases, whatnot, by 5% or so a year. So it's theoretical that if you don't hit that and you run vacancies, that would incorporate some new FTEs potentially, but it's not deliberately built into this. And it's a little bit less of an annual increase than we had with the last 5 years, where we did have some FTEs. That was about a 6% annual increase, for example. And personnel services, this equates to just over a 5% increase in personnel services.
This is Peggy. I would like to make a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Shepherd.
So between 2019 and 2021, the rate of increase is much flatter than it is between 2021 and the projection for 2021 through 2026. And I think that's what you just said, but it just wanted to make that observation. That's all.
Right. And so some of that, again, was kind of some spikiness, some decreases between 19 and 21 for community development, for example. So I might try to smooth that out if I take out those one-time instances that might make the chart track a little bit more. You'll see it a little bit more, that curve. But also, just for example, we've had 2 years in a row, and we were surprised that we've had no pension increase, no increase in pension costs, and no increase in health or dental or vision benefit costs. That's rare. That's not something that we're forecasting for the future. That's something that we've been very fortunate about these last 2 years. That's also helped to bend the curve down a little bit.
Councilmember Mayhew.
Oh, I was just going to make the same observation that Councilmember Shepherd made, and I think, I believe that in future sessions you'll get into some of the departmental details under this, or some of the details under these projections, and as we do, I think I'm going to have the same sort of question that I think Councilmember Shepherd had, which is, why is that rate appear higher? And I heard your answer just now, Mr. Hammoud. So maybe helping us to understand what's really different about this rate versus just sort of some one-timers.
Sure.
I think it's something we'll all want to, certainly I'll want to focus on and really understand, why the expenditures are doing that, because of course the implication of this is we got to figure out how to fund this, right?
So more narrative around the assumptions behind these increases.
Sure.
Mr. Mayor?
Who's
Just
Councilmember
Councilmember List.
Oh, Councilman Say, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question was very similar to Councilmember Mayhew's. I see I understand the forecasting. I understand we've got to project something. I just like more background on why a 9.6% annual increase over the next 5 years is what we're forecasting. It just seems, and again, this is not a criticism. I recognize we have to forecast something. We have to budget to something. I would like more background on why we foresee that this would be the rate of increase.
No, it's a great question. That's precisely what we want these slides to elicit, is to make sure everybody understands the assumptions behind the numbers. Otherwise, we're not going to have a very good dialogue as we weave everything together and agree on whether there's a problem or not. So,
Sure.
Thank you. Councilmember Ross.
So you said 9.6%. Isn't it more of a 5% increase each year?
Robert, I think that question is directed to you.
I believe so.
Yeah, the math works out to 9.6. I did a number of different year-on-year assessments.
My math shows about 5%.
Are you talking the current chart or the past chart?
I think they're talking the current chart everybody's looking at.
Yeah, if I took 19.3 to 20.2, I get 9.5 for that year.
$900,000 increase.
On that 1 year, that would be, and again, I can give you the detail on that.
Councilor Mayhew?
5%.
It's a 3.99% per year. So if I'm understanding Councilmember Lassay correctly, he's saying that for the 6-year period, it goes up 9%. But although, anyway, I just plugged into my calculator, I came up with essentially 4% per year from 21 to 26. Councilmember Lassay, I don't know if I got
18.5%. 10% of 18.5 is 1.85. That's way more than, that would be 20 plus whatever. It's way more than 19.
Right. So it would be nice to have an understanding of what the background is, what the percentage increases are, and the assumptions behind that. I just want to make sure we're clear, because I draw lines for a living. I like to understand math.
Me too.
I just did simple math of the difference between 22 and 23 is about $900,000, and $900,000 is about 4.7% of 19.3. So I'll leave the accounting wizards to figure out the actual compounded or annual average increase. But suffice to say, Robert, the question is just, which is precisely what I want the council to ask and know about, is what are the assumptions behind all the numbers? So if we could just add a little more. I mean, I don't know if you're ready to do it right off, to wing it now, or just to bring back a little more narrative on what's driving the increases. What are the 5 or 6 major factors that are driving the increase?
Yeah, I should be able to illustrate these next couple slides upcoming here should shed a little bit of light. And then if there's any questions afterward, we can definitely bring back some more of the topic here, the assumptions.
Okay.
Because if I go to the next slide, you can see governmental operating expenditures by category. So again, you see your main driver again of that increase is going to be salaries and benefits, personnel services over time. If there's anything depressing it a little bit in 19 and 20, it's because we've had more vacancies than we normally do. We normally run probably 1 to 2% vacancies citywide. We were running over 4% at one point. I think we still are. We have some retirements upcoming, so that's why, again, it's a little bit slow on that curve. We also, we're very fortunate, again, like I mentioned before, in 19 and 20, both years we saw benefits increase at 0, and the same thing with pension. Pension increased at 0. That's very rare. So that helped to slow down the curve a bit. But when we go into the future, we are anticipating, again, approximately, like I talked about, approximately 5% on salaries, approximately 6% on benefits. And then we talk about services and supplies. I'm run about between the 2 to 3% range. That's what we're looking at going forward. And those internal service charges, that's something that we have to revisit. Right now, we're just growing it at about a 2% rate of inflation, but we are going to be revisiting those internal service charges going forward. And so again, the internal service charges is the orange, the personnel, the services and supplies contracts, that's the green. And again, I can provide more breakout if it would help for the council on this slide. I'd definitely be willing to provide more of a breakout.
Councilor Mayhew.
So, Mr. Mahmood, maybe you could just, I thought I heard you just say that the salaries you were projecting at going up 5% a year. If I heard you correctly, that seems like a pretty big number. Wage inflation is half that. So, and I don't think our current union contracts are going up at that rate, but maybe I'm just wrong. Could you just talk a bit more about that assumption?
Sure. So if you remember what I talked about before, if we looked at the last 5 years, we saw a 6.2% increase in personnel services. Granted, there was some new positions that
We
were
saw what?
budgeted.
Say it again. We saw what?
It was about 6.2% of an increase annually the past 5 years getting to this point. So we're actually going under that a little bit. But at the same time, you have employees that may not be at the top steps, so they're getting increases each year. You have pay for performance that they receive each year on top of those increases, plus the COLA this year averaged between 2.5% and 3%, with some bargaining units I think getting even more than that. So we're trying to make sure we're factoring everything in there. Also, we want to make sure that, say, if benefits go up 10%, we're not too low on one, too high on the other. We're trying to get, what the average cost of these salary and benefits total are going up each year. We could see, for example, a double-digit increase in health in 2 years or 3 years. I've seen 50% increase in health before. So again, this is just our best estimate looking at, okay, if we look at, what the top steps are, what the longevity pay are, what including, vacation payouts that might happen for people that are retiring and turning over, plus looking at the pension increases, looking at potential increases for payroll taxes or Medicare or insurance, looking at those increases and then factoring them into our best guess here. So again, that's what we're looking at. But again, I'm coming up with 5%, where if you went the back 5 years, that was over 6%.
I would just keep in mind that our voters, our residents, are not on average, I think, getting those kind of raises. So it's we have to be able to explain that to them, and just keep that in mind and help us all understand that.
I have a question.
Councilor Shepherd and Councilor Holloway.
Right.
And then Rob.
This also includes overtime, correct?
Yeah, that was my question.
That's correct.
And in many cases, unanticipated or unbudgeted overtime, correct? Councilor Holloway?
So your 6% calculation over the past 5 years includes staff enhancements, correct?
I did, yes.
Okay, so you might want to make a distinction between staff enhancements and just inflationary growth. And that would bring your 6% to a much more reasonable percentage. And we've had significant staff enhancements in some of these areas.
Right. We've had some vacancies that offset some of that. So I don't know how, I could rerun it to say, 4% instead of 5%, or benefits that are 5% instead of 6%. You have some savings. I don't know what the term would be, significant or not, but I can rerun. If you're looking at me, if you're looking at it lowering a little bit, I'm willing to lower it just a little bit. But if we went down to, if we're anticipating 0 COLAs, is that realistic? Things like that. We know that, we have some units that still have pre-programmed increases going forward. So that's the other question. We have to build those into the forecast of this.
No, I'm probably just looking at your projection at taking down a level where you project, here's salary growth is this, benefits growth is this, and so that you can isolate out the enhancement portion that has occurred over the last 5 years. So bottom up of what that category decomposes to, and if you do it that way, I think you can pull out those staff enhancements and see what the value is.
Okay, but then I'd also have to. Am I assuming that we're fully employed too? Is the other question. Are we fully filled? I'll play with it. That's fine. I'll work with it. Thank you.
Councilor Ross.
I think it's been covered. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Robert, I think those are details well worth investing in having further conversation with the council so everybody understands what those levers are on the cost factors, and particularly as we get into those conversations. That's stuff we can come back and revisit. This isn't all one and done. When we come back and weave expenses and revenues together and then look at those three buckets, whether it's additional tax and fee increases, economic development or growth for new revenue, or whether it's looking at cost factors, that's when we can come back with more detail about what the questions you're raising now, and try to look more nuanced at some of those issues on cost factors. And I think what Robert's often doing is, he's making his best guess on it and then adding some conservative estimates into that to make sure we're not being too close to the bone on terms of where costs might be. Better to anticipate higher costs than what it might actually be. But if the council disagrees and says, no, we think we need to be less conservative, then that's precisely, I think, what's going to be part of that conversation when it comes to trying to solve that gap. All right, we ready to move on from this slide? All right, Robert, and hearing no further discussion, go ahead.
Okay, so here, the next slide here is government operating expenditures, again, by function. I can break out police and fire on this slide, so I'll do that. Just add another slide here. But you can see the public safety function, you start out at 7.9 million in 2019, goes up to about 10.5 million in 2026. Again, it's Snoqualmie Police plus fire. I do not have North Bend Police in this. Administration, non-departmental, you see that goes from about 5.3 million in 2019 up to about 6.4 in 2026. And you can see, again, streets and parks operations, 3.5 to 4.2. And you can see, as we talked about earlier, community development, it's going to, we're anticipating to slow it down. This is actually before the emergency situation. We were already expecting less activity, meaning less expenses going into 21, because again, we're not anticipating any new projects in this budget, in this base budget as is right now. So we do expect their expenditures also to drop with a decrease in activity in that department as well going into 21. And then again, we're just growing that on those inflationary things we talked about before.
Okay, any questions, council? Councilor Ross?
So wouldn't the mill site be included in 2021? Would that increase? Wouldn't there be an increase in community development?
In costs, operational costs?
Right. Would you see more operational costs with the mill site?
Robert?
You would on the CD end if it was passed, but again, this is just a base budget right now. It only includes the current mill site work. It does not include future construction because hasn't been approved by council yet. So right now that's another option we'll show in the future. We have another slide that shows it as an option in the future, but right now it is not built into our base budget. Neither are the revenues.
Councilor Holloway, do you have a hand up? Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Councilor Lissay, go ahead.
Robert, I'm just curious, previous slides and this one for the most part has pretty consistent forecast increases. I'm curious why public safety from 23 to 24 has a smaller increase, and then again from 25 to 26 has a smaller dollar increase than the previous years. It roughly looks like you're tracking at roughly around 5%, but then those have a more like a 2.5-3% increase for those year on year. I'm just kind of curious, is that just what's the factor in why those years wouldn't have a bigger increase?
They're just rounding. I mean, I think just presenting this chart just with the one digit, they're consistent from 22 to 26. That's a consistent increase.
Yeah, okay. I got you.
Sorry.
Councilor Mayhew.
Mr. Hammoud, do you use a constant dollar rate of increase or a constant percentage rate of increase?
Percentage rate of increase.
Got it. Thanks.
So if I lower that, there will be an impact, but I'll show that as a separate slide when we update this chart. So again, forecast factors, again, no changes to those slides I just showed you, factored into the forecast as a result of the current COVID-19 emergency. Outside legal counsel fees are accounted for about 460,000 of expenditures in non-departmental in 2019. Again, we're expecting hopefully to recover those fees in the current budget this year. Community development, building expenditures, like I just mentioned, they expected to drop in 2021, but again, that's commensurate with also a decrease in revenue for CD as well during that year. And again, personnel service, total average approximately 5.2% annual through the forecast. Internal service fund charges about 3.7% annual increase. And again, that includes some salaries embedded in that number as well. Sorry, go ahead.
What are the, and if you're going to save this for the Q&A at the end, I'm totally fine with passing on it for now. When we talk about COVID-19 expenses that the city would bear, what type of expenses are we talking about?
Yeah, I've got one slide at the end for COVID-19.
Perfect.
And I could, so if you just leave it for 3 minutes, we'll get back to this.
Perfect.
And I'll explain a little bit more. Any more questions on these slides? Okay. Any questions so far on the expenditures? I have some follow-up information, so I will get back to everybody on this.
Any questions on the questions and expenditure slide? All right, continue, Robert, please.
Okay, so we have one slide on the COVID-19. We can discuss this a little bit. Federal government, of course, extended the emergency orders right now till April 30th. We're assuming that Washington will follow suit at this point. That means one more month of near zero activity for certain sectors and certain businesses within our community, unfortunately. But it was offset possibly by the passage of the federal stimulus. There's future actions for further stimulus, including potential infrastructure stimulus that has been discussed at the federal level. Again, this is a very fluid situation, changing hourly at some points. There was a record weekly number of federal unemployment claims, about 3.28 million for the week ending 3/21. A lot of the assumptions is it was even higher for last week when those numbers come out. King County unemployment claims were a little over 37,000 for the week ending 3/21 as well. One caveat to those numbers is the fact that there are employees that say work at a restaurant in town that shuttered. I know there's a couple downtown that temporarily closed for the emergency. Those employees would actually, service workers would qualify for unemployment. Same thing with Macy's, if you heard that they furloughed their employees. They qualify for unemployment, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're permanently unemployed. It means that's pretty much a temporary unemployment. They qualify for benefits, but they could be recalled when the emergency ends. So again, this depends on, these might not all be permanent claims. They could be just temporary claims depending on the duration of the emergency. So this is something that needs to be watched, of course, but it could rebound depending on, how fast the economy does come out of this. Another item that I added in here, because I do believe it affects the immediate area, shutdown of all state recreation facilities, including closure of fishing and major trailheads. Essentially, that means that if you're on the weekend and you want to go hiking, you're not going to be doing it around here. Meaning you're not going to go back into town, fill up with gas, get a soda, eat at Rio Bravito. It's not going to happen right now. There's going to be less people coming through. That's going to impact, I think, some of our local businesses, unfortunately, more than they have been before, because where there was still a little bit of weekend visitors here, this shutdown will impact those weekend visitors and reduce it. They probably did this last weekend, I could imagine. And another item that has been updated since last week was the shutdown of the construction sector. So this time a week ago, we were still doing building inspections. There were still plan reviews going on, and there's still construction projects within town. All of that's now suspended, so that's going to have an impact. We don't know how long the impact is because, again, we don't know how long this is going to last right now. some local economic.
That includes, that includes the hockey arena and the church on the ridge, although the panorama project can continue because that's considered as an affordable housing project, a critical project or essential project.
Alaska Airlines announced elimination of 70% of its flights through May. They furloughed some of their employees, but again, they could end up, qualifying for unemployment benefits, but it could be temporary in duration. Again, it's unclear. It's unclear on the impact of certain of the local companies here right now. The economy is expected to contract through Q2 of 2019. The duration and magnitude right now is uncertain. So again,
Robert,
we're updating. Go ahead.
That's Q2 2020, is it not?
I'm sorry, Q2 2020. I'm sorry. Good type. That's a typo. And right now, we're just not sure what's uncertain. Now, to Councilmember Ross's question a little bit earlier, we do believe we're going to be reimbursed for certain expenses such as PPE and other items that are in the stockpile, hand sanitizer, certain equipment that the fire department also might need. So we're tracking all those expenses as they come in. Right now, it's a low dollar amount, but again, it depends on the duration of the emergency. But we're also seeing some decrease in expenses. So if you remember about a week ago, I talked about revenues dropping. Our expenditures are still going to come in at this point, at least with the latest information we have, on par with the revenues coming in this year. So we're still looking at a balanced budget. And part of it's because our expenses have actually decreased during this emergency a bit. Obviously, our travel and training, we spent 3% of the total budget all year. Some of that was still items, still some training and travel that was still being refunded to the city at the time. So we're down to probably 1% of that expense. So that's about a $200,000 to $300,000 savings right there. With people working from home, we have kind of a possible decrease in some of our utilities expenses for the city buildings and city facilities. We're using our fleet less, we're using things less. There's going to be some savings out of that right now.
Councilman Ross.
So for our city construction projects, are those considered essential? Do we have any projects going on right now, or are they not? Are they halted?
I was under the assumption that our capital projects were halted. I'm not sure about the high school. I don't know if the high school was deemed essential or not. That was the other large project going on in the city. It was the second phase of the high school.
The contractor in the high school project did decide to ramp down. They've stopped construction. That's a great question. I haven't heard about some of our own capital projects if we're still laying pipe and whatnot. I would suspect that falls within an allowable category as an essential service in terms of providing sewer and water and other essential city services.
Right. And then how many employees do you currently have working at City Hall, or is everyone working from home?
No, and if you could speak to that a little bit, it was a great question that Councilmember Sunwell asked a little earlier. As you recall, at the last council meeting, we originally were kind of preparing with all the mad scramble and all the quickly changing circumstances to anticipate needing the council to appropriate additional contingency monies. We thought that dollar figure might be rather substantial initially because it would have to cover some staffing costs for unpaid or leave. But my approach to it was to say, look, if the revenues are coming in for staff salaries anyway, and we can continue to pay staff, I'd rather send as many as are necessary home, and then we have them set up. We set them up to do as much work from home as absolutely possible. If there are some who simply can't execute or do their duties from home, then we would see if we can reprogram them. For example, Nicole, once the events pretty much collapsed, we've lent Nicole to the Chamber of Commerce, working with Kelly Coughlin to tend to any issues happening with the small business community in Snoqualmie, to do whatever we can assist there. Kelly is in the process of trying to set up a program similar to what Kirkland did, where they, and maybe from the tribe or the county, is to seed the program with $150,000 of privately raised funds to assist the business community who can make application for those grant monies. But some of what would help execute that would be manpower, and we can provide the, without a gift of public funds. And I think Sturbank, checking with Kirkland's attorneys, feel comfortable that we could probably at least lend some city staff to some of those types of efforts. So that's where we're watching carefully for anywhere we can, again, like we did do during flood events, reprogram staff. So there is some anticipation that maybe on leave or other policies, there might be some staffing costs connected with it. Robert, refresh my memory, Mark Carrera, Chief Carrera just sent out a memo earlier with some cost estimates, and there were some $50,000 connected with, like, my memory escapes me now what the other, aside from staffing costs, a recommendation for perhaps bringing before council an appropriation of some contingency monies. Do you recall what that? I could find the email real quick.
Yeah.
One last item before maybe Robert finds that, or I recall. We scrambled quickly to, it's really horrible timing because now the season is over for the homeless shelter services and the funding providing overnight shelter like the Methodist Church of the Grange. So all those people are essentially sent back off into the woods or wherever they can find to spend the night, sleeping in their cars or the woods or whatever. We have been trying to work with Jennifer Kirk to keep the day center open to a minimum at least 3 hours a week right now. But anticipation that some of those folks might come in with symptoms of COVID-19, we informed all groups which can't meet anyway. We informed all the scouting programs that the library was being basically taken as a holding center for the Snoqualmie Valley Shelter Services. So if anybody is exhibiting symptoms, they could quickly remove them from the rest of the population, hold them in the library until such time that they can then transport them to other services in the region to be tended to, but at least to segregate them from the population. So they needed that kind of facility. In order to also facilitate staff time, I did approve $9,000 of additional funding for the Snoqualmie Valley Shelter Services. And we're anticipating similar needs from whether it's the Senior Services Center or the Senior Center delivering food to seniors who are basically homebound and have no transportation right now. The food bank. Great news was there was a Seattle Foundation that we worked to get applications in to pitch for a few of our Valley services, and the food bank was awarded $50,000 from that center, along with the Senior Center Incarnation, which coordinates a bit with our senior center too. So $25,000 for them. So I guess what I'm trying to do real quick is to say I'm anticipating, something that could balloon upwards of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 of additional funding for some of the social service agencies that are trying to fill the gaps on a lot of families and vulnerable populations right now as this thing continues. Robert, did you find the email from Mark on the details of that one?
Mark was trying to chime in, but unfortunately his sound went out. He said that the 3 items in the email were staffing, PPE, and building and cleaning costs.
Oh, yes, thank you. So we found a great outfit that just got done cleaning the police department at a fraction of the cost of what was otherwise from some other company. They come in and sort of do a special spray and so forth, the police cars and the buildings. So there's several $1,000s in costs that we're incurring every time we go in and deep clean a facility, a city facility, in addition to the PPE equipment that we're trying to scramble to get. For example, we're trying to keep the restrooms open in the parks, but the challenge has been getting proper PPE or personal protective equipment for the city staff so that they're protected as they deal with that stuff. And we put signs on, we were ready to go out and do similar to what the shelter services did, which was put a porta potty outside the restroom to protect the staff. But it doesn't make sense to me if we're putting a porta potty out there that we're not clean. Why not? We just decided to put signs on the doors that say, can't frequently or properly clean the facilities due to lack of protective gear for city staff. Use at your own risk. Hopefully that dissuades the vast majority of people from using the restrooms right now, but it might be more of a health factor if they were shut down completely if someone is in an emergency situation and needs to use the restroom, whether out on a trail or going through a park. So that's kind of some of the issues we're dealing with. Sean, or Councilmember Sunwell, does that address some of the questions you had about what might be coming?
Way more than I expected. Yes, that's awesome.
All right. Are there any objections you council members have about our need to go that direction or fund those agencies if that need or request starts coming in? Councilor Mayhew?
Yeah, I just want to say these are just, I think, excellent examples of things that we can think about. I think as we go through this budget year and think about those reserves that we have, the emergency reserve and then the sustainability those reserves, I think what would be great is if we put in place some guidance as to how we would expect those reserves would get used. And in fact, maybe even think about, for some of those categories, some of those sort of, in essence, kicking in sort of automatically or funds being automatically made available for emergencies, so that some of the mechanics that we're all going to have to end up going through to appropriate the money that is being spent and cover that, but some of that maybe is lined up a bit more in advance. But these are great things for us to think about when we evaluate the adequacy of these reserves going forward. So your question was, I certainly have no objection to the things you just outlined myself. But I think they're good examples for us to think about more from a policy perspective going forward, how we make sure that that is available in the future for this type of or other types of things that might have those needs. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. So just to reiterate again, Robert, if you could speak to there was some contingency funds that were already appropriated that Robert felt I was authorized to at least tap into those when I had to make a quick decision, for example, about the Snoqualmie Valley Shelter Services or additional funding, which, by the way, North Bend ended up coming through with $5,000 too, so we were appreciative of that. And that current funding is just north of $100,000, but between 45 or 50 that we might, again, we may hopefully not need to use much of it, but just to have that available between the PPE, or the personal protective equipment, and the cleaning of city facilities. Or some of the social service agencies that could have requests that start, ratcheting up to $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. But that's why we pulled that one agenda bill back last week. We felt that at least for the time being, or for the next couple of weeks, we're probably okay with the 110 or so thousand in contingency monies, but that'll probably be tapped here fairly soon. So we'll probably prepare something even for Monday to give a little more breathing room there, of another 50 or 1,000 or so, if that's okay with the council. Robert, did you want to clarify if I said anything inaccurate there about?
No. Yeah, that's completely.
All right, Councilor Mayhew.
Yeah. So, Mayor, what you said makes a complete sense to me. I would encourage you all to look at the notion that instead of, I briefly looked at that agenda bill before it got pulled back, and it seemed to be on a path of taking money from the contingency reserves and moving it into the general fund. I'd encourage you to think instead about just those contingency funds should just be available. And so if we need to do an appropriation or something of that nature, I think we should just, and then those charges just get charged into that fund rather than getting the confusion of mingling that in with the regular spending. I think all of the emergency spending ought to just go against those funds. That's what they're there for. I think that'll make it easier for you to just move on that. And I'd say whatever we all need to do to provide the appropriation and the approval for that spending to occur, just please bring that to us. But I'd encourage you to go that path rather than complex fund balance moves. Just make those funds available to you.
So just leave the funds where they are, but just have some council authorization to use them for the emergency purposes responding to the COVID-19. Okay.
I have a question or a comment or a request.
Yeah, Councilor.
Can you send us an email of what you just said? Because you kind of listed quite a few things, and I'm sorry, but I'm not able to recall everything that you had just listed that you want us to agree to. And I'd just like to see what all, it sounds like good stuff, but I'd just like to see it written out.
Yeah, that's certainly fair enough. I'll work with Chief Carrera in the next couple of days to capture some of what he's already, Chief's been doing a great job sort of coordinating much of our efforts, particularly when Rick and I were down in the first week, or not quite running 100% in the first week or two. And so we've actually compensated him a little extra to take on a bit more of a leadership role right now. But Mark and I will capture some of what he's already done, and then I'll talk about more of those social service agency things and the potentials there for funding. But that's a great comment, Councilor Shepherd. I'd welcome doing that. Councilor Ross?
So I've had neighbors ask me, so where's the most pertinent area right now to donate money? And so I suggested, the food bank, and then also the Snoqualmie Valley shelters, then also St. Vincent de Paul that would help with rental assistance, things like that. I'm just wondering, I'm sure a lot of people have questions, where should they be donating right now that will help people in the Valley? And I'm wondering if Joan could put together something that might list the different services in the Valley that's helping people, and that would be a great place for them to donate.
Yeah, that's a great point. Joan has done a fantastic job. If you've looked at our website, or just do a search even for COVID-19, of putting a great deal of information out there for residents, for businesses, for our small businesses and so forth, for where they could go for resources and kind of what we're doing. And we've been having a lot of conferences on a bi-weekly basis with Chamber of Commerce. Mark helped coordinate a lot of the social service agencies, the City of North Bend Hospital, and others, where we just kind of get on and share ideas about what everybody's doing to make sure no one's duplicating efforts or stepping. Love Snoqualmie Valley has done a phenomenal job of acting as sort of a clearinghouse for some of those efforts. If you go to their website, it's pretty cool. They put up a section that's basically if you have a need or if you can give to a need. So that's a great resource to point to people too, because it's not one specific one where you go to the food bank, whatever else. All those agencies are the churches and city and governments and chamber and all that are directing a lot of folks to their site to be used as kind of a clearinghouse for connecting want with needs, or I'm sorry, connecting resources with needs. And so a resident that talks to you, for example, Councilmember Ross, could be directed to that as one of the resources, but through that resource, they can find several agencies that they might say, hey, this is the one I like the most, or the need I like the most and would love to donate to. And we hope to have within the next few days or by the end of this week, some program, like I said, similar to Kirkland, that's specifically designed to address the needs of many of the small businesses or the business community in the Valley that Kelly Coughlin will be rolling out that I spoke to earlier. And so that would, but to your point, we need to do a good job. I did jot that down. I'll talk with Joan more about it, or Joan's, I think, listening in, of how we can make that more visible on our website to direct people to those.
I wouldn't have thought to go to the website, our website, to figure out where to donate. And someone mentioned, hey, should I give to Love Snoqualmie Valley? And I thought, well, why don't you just give directly to the food banks? I didn't realize that Love Snoqualmie Valley was doing this. Yeah. So maybe some more information out there to the public. Just, I don't know, sending it through our blog or Living Snoqualmie or something.
Yeah, we've been pushing quite a deal of information to Dana McCullough, trying to keep her in the loop on all that information. In fact, much of the information that's coming to me, which is a considerable amount, from Deanna Dawson with Sound Cities Association. I think many of you have seen some of that information. The Chamber of Commerce and others, we've been keeping folks like Dana in that loop so she can, of course, we can't tell her precisely to run a story on, but she's pushing out some of that information. It would be great if she did a story on some of the Love Snoqualmie efforts, because I think they're really doing a phenomenal job right now helping coordinate. Again, they represent all of us, government, non-governmental, private sector. So that's the whole philosophy behind the whole Love Snoqualmie Valley structure, is that no particular agency gets credit, but everybody can participate in kind of that central clearinghouse.
Okay. Thank you.
Council, we're coming up on about 6 minutes, we did an earlier meeting. It was originally thought we were going to do this about 7 to 9 or a 2-hour meeting, but we did start early. I think Robert can segue into some additional slides on weaving those expense and revenue lines together, which is kind of entering into a very, very different phase of the conversation, kind of looking at the problem now that you've seen both revenues and expenses. And again, it's not all baked in concrete. We can continue to question the assumptions on either one of those lines. Do you want to continue to do a little more time tonight, or is in the next 5 minutes or so, maybe a little more conversation about COVID, or what you'd like to see myself or the administration doing to respond to the community on those issues? Or do you want to continue some conversation on the work plan further tonight?
I have a comment from one of the residents. I posted a link to, I think it was the City of Kent's website for opportunities for finding funding for small business on their website. And one resident asked if we could put that on our city's website. So there's things that are coming through SCA from, I think it's Deanna. And so I would like to make sure that we're kind of, if we've got the time, staff time, in order to add that to our website, I think that would really be helpful to our businesses.
Councilmember Shepherd, have you reviewed some of the work that Joan has done and with Nicole, or what information they have put on our website? That may already be included. She's got quite a...
Yeah, I'll double check, but if I find anything that I think might be helpful, I can let her know.
Okay. All right. So again, Council, do you want to just continue with some further conversation about the COVID-19 and further actions, the questions you've heard from the community, concerns that you may have about, hey, what are we doing about, or this or that, or what could we do, and maybe wrap it up there tonight? Or do you want to have Robert continue on with some other work plan information?
I'm fine wrapping it up.
Okay. Councilor Mayhew? Audio.
Yeah.
Audio. I know Sean makes it that way, but sorry, I try to keep reminding.
I was saying something complimentary to Councilmember Sunwall, which I realize now was a terrible mistake, and I won't do now that. No, I was saying I agree with Councilmember Sunwall. I think your next section you're going to start to get into. I think getting into sort of where do we go from here, solutions, how do we match up the revenue expenses, and then what are the solutions? I think that's a really valuable conversation, and I'd be happy to take that fresh at our next discussion. That's my view.
All right. Councilmember Holloway, was your hand up for a second or no? All right. Okay, any other questions on?
So this is Bob Jeans. I have a comment.
Go ahead, Bob.
I'm getting a lot of information. A lot of people, I think, want to be helpful. So I get something from the county. I get something from Sound Cities. I get something from King County, but I don't get anything from the King County. It is a different council member. It's not Kathy Lambert. Does anybody know why we're not hearing from Kathy Lambert, or have they just delegated and assigned that to one county council member to also be giving us input?
I think that may be a product of which committees that some of the King County council members serve on. And so that's why I think you see a little bit more activity from like Cole's, I can't remember the council member's name, but Claudia Balducci's been extensively involved too. So a little more, I think to your point, Bob, it's probably more that they've assigned those duties to rather than having several of them out there communicating, that at least a couple are carrying the ball on that primarily. Or at least
plenty on her Facebook page.
I'm sorry?
If you're on Kathy's Facebook page, she said plenty.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. She's pushing out a lot of the same information that the other council members are. They're getting a lot of that from the county staff and so forth. All right. Any other questions?
Isn't Balducci the president of the council? Isn't that why she's pushing it out on behalf of the council?
That could be, actually. I should know who the president is this year, but you're probably right, Councilor May. That could be the issue. Any other questions, comments, or concerns on the COVID-19 issues? All right. With that, if there's no further comments or questions, Council, thank you so much for your time tonight, and everybody stay safe and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Good night.
Robert. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.